Welcome to Success Weekly with James Tharris, a weekly dose of thought-provoking ideas and helpful tips on improving your mindset. And now, here's your host, James Tharris.
Welcome to another weekly episode of Success Weekly. I'm James Tharris, and I'm going to kind of pick up where I left off last week, and I'm going to continue on with this book, Psycho-Cybernetics. What a great book for anybody looking to improve themselves. Now, as I said in my last podcast, it's not an enjoyable read if you're used to reading novels and fiction stories that kind of captivate your imagination. But this one's got so many meat and potatoes and little golden nuggets that can help you identify mistakes you've been making and problems that you need to be addressing, that it's well worth reading. And even if you just read a page per day or even a page per week if you're not reading regularly, and always read with a highlighter so you can grab these gems. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this chapter 2 here, and I'm going to give you a couple of thoughts here that I've highlighted. The chapter 2 is called Discovering the Success Mechanism Within You. And the first one I have here, it says, the faculty of imagination is the great spring of human activity and the principal source of human improvement. Destroy this faculty, and the condition of man will become as stationary as that of the brutes. And that was said by Dugald Stewart, the famous Scottish philosopher who I've never heard of. But wow, that's powerful. And then he goes on to say that you can imagine your future. And that's really what the self-esteem and self-image is all about. And that's what this whole book's about, psycho-cybernetics. Psycho as in your psychology. And the cybernetics is kind of like how you work on it. And so it's kind of like working on your mind, working on yourself. So what he's talking about is having imagination. And so many people that I know, it's becoming harder and harder to find people that have imagination. It's like everybody's walking around, as a good friend of mine used to say, they're walking around with their umbilical cord in their hand looking for some place to plug it in. And that's because they're not very creative on their own. And I'm that way to some degree. I'm a very creative person, but at the same time, I need to be plugged into other creative people. Otherwise, I find myself kind of like a bank account being drained to the point where there's nothing there. And I find myself having no creativity for a while. So you have to learn how to get around people that are creative and have imagination and that dream big and dream things that the average person doesn't dream, or they think things that aren't possible for most other people, or they think about doing things that the average person finds ridiculous. They find it idiotic for somebody even thinking that that's possible. And I'm not really talking about things like hitting the lottery and finding ways, but there are people that have proven to do that as well. So I guess we can't totally rule that out. But I'm thinking about more of things that people in their 50s or 60s looking to start their second careers, or maybe in their 70s already starting their third or fourth careers, or they're getting married late in life, or having a child later in life, and things like that, or they're starting up a business and deciding that they're going to, instead of having one location, they're going to have 20 locations, and it takes a lot of imagination to kind of, and belief in yourself to kind of have those big thoughts. And so another saying, I forget who said it, maybe you've heard it before, and it's basically goes like this: is if you knew that there was no way for you to fail, what would you do in life? If you knew you couldn't fail, it's kind of like if you were Superman and you couldn't be hurt by anything, or you didn't age, you didn't get sick, you didn't have to worry about getting hurt or whatever. What things would you do differently? What would you do in your life? That's a big question, and it's a scary question. That's and it comes back to, it's our self-image. One of the things that I pride myself on. And it's a double-edged sword, by the way. So don't think that any of these things that I talk about are just full of straight shots to success, because there's always a double-edged sword to anything that you do. And it's the kind of like the old saying that no risk, no reward. I'm a person that I take a lot of risks in life. Always have. I deem myself a gambler. Not in the sense that, I'm going to go out and spend my paycheck and gamble money and buy lottery tickets and things like that. I will occasionally do that. And in fact, I remember, I think it was just a couple of months ago, I went to Pittsburgh, took my wife to see her father, and I just had this really strange feeling when we went to a grocery store that I was going to spend $5 on a lottery ticket. a scratch-off ticket, which I very seldom do. I probably do it once every 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years. And I decided I was going to do this. And I spent $5 on one ticket, scratched it off, and lo and behold, I won $41 that day. And, that's not something that I'm going to go out and repeat all the time because it's stupid. For every 50 times I try that, I'm probably not going to get anything. But if I do it, when I get a special hunch and I take a calculated risk, I've got $5. I'm not worried about losing this. Let's take a chance. And, sometimes that happens. So again, no risk, no reward. But that's kind of what I've been like in my life with business and relationships and, martial arts and competition. At the time, I remember when I was competing regularly, before I really understood how important that training for results were, I didn't train much for competition. I would train in class and do those kind of things, and I thought that was enough. And I remember all these, all these people around me and other students. And we had a competition coming up, and I would say, "Are you going to compete?" Oh, and they'd say, "Oh, no, I'm not ready for it." And I'd say, "I'm not ready either, but I'm going to go out and do it." And I didn't realize at the time just how different that was from all of my classmates, many of my classmates. There were some that did it with me, but not for every one that did it with me, there were 10 that didn't. And then there were a couple at the higher echelon that really trained really diligently, and of course they competed because they were always ready. I wasn't always ready, but I was always ready and willing to take a risk and having the imagination, wow, what if I go out there and find out I'm good at something? That's the mindset I came from. What if I go out there and learn that I'm not very good at something here, so then when I come back to class, I'm going to know where to spend extra time before class or maybe even during class or after class training to help improve that particular area so that I can get better at it. That's the mindset that I went into these competitions with in the beginning. And many times I would come out losing. I didn't lose. I didn't win anything. But what I did win is a little self-esteem knowing that I did it and 10 other guys didn't. And they made the excuse they weren't ready. Well, I wasn't ready either. But occasionally, I would have a little success and I would come back with a third place trophy and sometimes, as I got better at it, a second or a first place and maybe even a grand champion trophy. And when I didn't really get to the grand champion level until I started changing my thoughts and getting more creative about the way I trained. A lot of times, I think the reason that I competed for 8 years straight without winning anything. Not a second place, not a third place, not even a participation medal or trophy because they didn't have them back in those days. But I just kept doing it thinking I was going to get lucky and I was going to go to a competition where there was a guy that just wasn't as good as me and I was finally going to win something, and it just never happened. And so I started thinking, well, I want to do this and this is fun, but I'm tired of losing. So what are some creative ways that I can think about my training that I can improve upon this? And so maybe I'll do my form 3 or 4 extra times during class tonight, or maybe I'm going to put a little bit more extra emphasis on the power this time. And lo and behold, that turned into me getting my first 5th place out of 6 people in my division in 1991, I think that when it was. And that's the first time I got any taste of success. That was the equivalent, I guess, of the participation medal because I still have it. I'm looking at it right now, and it was just a certificate, handwritten certificate. And I was 5th place, and I have it framed, and why would I want to frame a 5th place certificate? Because that was the starting point of my getting creative and imaginative in my training and thinking and imagining to myself, wow, if I did this, I can imagine what it would be like to get a 3rd place or a bronze medal. Because I don't think I'm ready for a 2nd place or 1st place. And if you go back to the last week's podcast, you'll understand how important that was with my self-image. Just thinking that I just wasn't good enough and there's just no way I could do that. And so I proved myself right. But when I got this stinking little 5th place certificate, man, my worldview changed in an instant. And at least I was better than one person. So now I wanted to be better than 2 people or 3 people. And so I went back to the drawing board and I started to evaluate what I was doing and what I wasn't doing, which was more important, the things I wasn't doing, and the more that I did, the more success that miraculously seemed to happen. When I got my first 3rd place, that was because I started staying after classes for half an hour once or twice a week. When I started placing consistently 2nd places, it was because I was coming early and training a little bit before class and then staying a little after class. And when I started getting my 1st places, well, those are the times that I started to really pay attention to what my master instructor was saying and put more emphasis on specific elements of my training during class. And then suddenly I was getting these 1st places, but that grand champion was just eluding me. I could not get it. And the grand champion is when you beat all of the first place winners, and that's when you really, know that you've done something that's worth, bragging home and writing home to mama about, right? And what I did at that point, that's when I started really paying attention to my videos of myself. I'd always videotape myself, but not until that point. At that point, that's when I really started to videotape myself and perform my forms and my self-defense techniques and my basic kicking techniques and whatever, my sparring and things on video that I could go back and review it. And that was the big moment for me that I realized your coordination needs work, or your flexibility needs work, or your attitude. I remember thinking back at that moment during that sparring match that I was going to lose and thinking, wow, no wonder I lost. The guy was bigger than me in things and maybe better than me, but I let his belt color or how many stripes he had on his belt get to me. And I realized at that point I needed to work on my mind. And so then when I started reading, that's about this. Isn't that funny? That's about the same time that I started realizing all the problems I had in my life and how I had helped make them happen and why I was still stuck in these places. And that it affected my martial arts training as well. So it all kind of happened around the same time. And when I started looking at those videos, video just doesn't lie. It's like, watching yourself from a third-party perspective, and you think you're better than you are until you see yourself perform on video. That's why people don't like listening to themselves after they've recorded their voice on audio tape or watching a video. And is that how I sound? And they just don't like it. And maybe you've done that before. And, after you've done it for a long enough time, you get used to it, and then you learn how to speak better or more eloquently or whatever you need to do so you're not so ashamed of your voice on audio, or seeing your performance when you did that dance recital, or seeing your gymnastics performance, or in my case, my martial arts performance. But that's where it comes back to this book here, and that little piece there about the faculty of imagination. I had to imagine myself first and foremost as a champion. And I remember one of the things that I started doing, and it's funny, right? I think it was right around the time that I took my first grand champion trophy. I think that, in fact, that might be the first year. Wow, this is exciting because I didn't really put the dots together until just now. I think it was the very first year, 1996, that I took my very first 6-foot grand champion trophy, and I really worked my tail end off for that trophy. What I did right before the competition, though, and it was probably, I had read this book, yes, because that was 1996, and I think I read this thing in 93. I started changing my thought processes and my beliefs about myself. And I started to transfer that into my martial arts training. And I started to feel like, I do feel like I deserve to wear this black belt. I do feel like I deserve to get first place in my competition. After all, I've worked hard on this. It wasn't no longer me going out and hoping for luck like a lottery. I was actually working towards it and getting creative in my approach to my training. And so what I did was, when I got into the competition, they had these little podiums that had first, second, and third place. And I remember the very first time I did this, I stepped up onto that first place podium, and I looked out over the crowd, looked over the auditorium, and looked at everybody and thought to myself, you know what? By the end of the day, I'm going to be standing back up here with a first place trophy in my hand. And not only did I achieve that, I also achieved my first grand champion trophy that year. And I believe that was also the first year that I stepped up on that podium and just believed that I could do it. Now, I wasn't the most physically gifted person in the room. I wasn't the youngest person in the room. I wasn't the person with the highest self-esteem and the most experience and most wins in that room. But I was the person, probably the most improved person mentally in that room. And that's the reason why I think that I took that grand champion trophy that day. And from then on, every time I went to a competition that had those little podiums, that's what I would do. I would walk up and stand on those podiums and look out across the audience. And I remember getting really crazy looks back from some of the other competitors and going, I could see their wheels turning with that look on their face, thinking to themselves, who does this guy think he is? You know what? And at that time, I didn't care anymore. My thought, it was like we were speaking back and forth, telepathically. And my return thought to those people were, I'll tell you who I think I am. I think I'm the guy who's going to take that first place trophy from you, and I'm going to be standing back here on this podium because I believe in myself. And that's all that I'm saying. I'm not saying that I'm better than you. I just think that I deserve it just as much as you do. And there's nothing wrong with me believing enough in myself to step up here and dream a little bit and to see what it would feel like and look like when I'm going to be doing this later. And that's a big, big thing for a lot of people. So I think that maybe that's something for you that you can pull from this podcast and put into action in your own life. Maybe you've been holding yourself back by not believing in yourself or not thinking yourself worthy enough of certain success in life, whatever that is for you. You know, you've got to realize that you're a human being. You're born with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a brain, just like everybody else. And if you get around people that consistently call you stupid, and call you idiotic and retarded and things like that, and you hang around these guys, they're going to brainwash you and convince you that those things are true, and that's all that you're going to be in life. So you've got to separate yourself from those kind of people and get yourself around people that believe in you. And that's what being involved in a martial arts program did for me, because do you think that my martial arts master instructor and the black belts that I was learning from were telling me that I was stupid and idiotic and retarded and I wasn't, good and I was never going to be able to do things? Of course not. If they did, I would have never stayed. They told me that I could do it. They made me believe in myself, and they really affected my self-esteem in a positive way. And when I coupled that with reading, my goodness, that's when all of my successes really started to manifest. And up until today, I guess I never realized the time frame, but it kind of all really began when I started reading regularly. And that's why I can't stress enough the importance of reading. And can you read magazines and things? Absolutely. I read them myself. I have 2 magazines that I get on a regular basis. One of them is called Success Magazine, as you might guess. The other one is called Entertainment Weekly. I'm a big fan of movies and music and TV shows and things like that. And I love just pure entertainment, but I like to keep up on pop culture and seeing, who's doing what and what's coming out and what people think about this and just what's going on in the entertainment world. So that for me, that's like my Jello or my pudding. That's not the mainstay of my digestion in mental my mental diet. That's not what I digest on a regular basis. That's something that I get it's Entertainment Weekly. It comes in once a week, and sometimes it's every other week. And I probably spend one day reading it, and then I toss the magazine. But for me, it's a little fun to read and kind of light reading. So that's something that's for me is important, but that's not what's going to really propel me to new levels of success. What is going to propel me to new levels of success is that magazine, Success Magazine. And I'll read like an article per day. But I'm always in a book or 2 books or 3 books at the same time, or sometimes I'm focused on just one book. I might be reading a chapter out of 2 or 3 different books on different types of subjects. So like maybe, for instance, I'm reading a book on martial arts. I read a chapter on a book on Kung Fu, and I get a little information out of that. Maybe it's a how-to thing. And then out of a second book, I'm reading a book like this, Psycho-Cybernetics. I just read a chapter on the self-image. And then the other book I'm reading is on, language, how to speak Korean or something like that. And that might be an example of why I would read 3 different books. And it's to learn three different things that it's kind of like when you go to school, people don't usually go to school and sit there for 8 hours a day in math class. No, they go from 40 to 60 minutes in math class, then they go to language class for 40 to 60 minutes, then they go to a gym class, and then they have lunch, and then they have recess, and then they have history. And you can do the same thing with reading, and I mean that's what we were programmed to do. So I kind of find myself, I guess, following that same pattern in my adult life. Habits we train or habits we gain, I guess. And so, but I'll do that for a long time, and then it might be that I get through all these books and these magazines, and there's 10 days until the next one comes in, and I don't have a book to read, so I solely focus on one book and power through it and finish it. And, then I'll go on to the next one. I'll start reading one book, but then somewhere in the middle of reading that next book, a second book kind of creeps in, and I see it and go, wow, I'd like to learn about that too, but it's a different type of subject. And so I'll do that. I typically won't read, for instance, 2 leadership books at the same time, or two books on sales at the same time. It's usually one at a time like that. So that might be something you'd like to try. But anyway, that's kind of all I've got for this week. I take that back. I'm going to go to the end of this chapter here, because I'm going to kind of quickly skim through it, because it gives you a little practice exercise where it says getting a new mental picture of yourself. And I'm just going to read the 5 little steps here, and I'm not going to comment too much on it, but I want you to see the power of reading a book like this. And it says, this is, what did I say these were? The practice exercise number 1, how to get a new mental image of yourself. So it says, number 1, your built-in success mechanism must have a goal or a target. All right. Number 2, the automatic mechanism is teleological. That is, operates or must be oriented to end results or goals. Number 3, don't be afraid of making mistakes or of temporary failures. Number 4, skill learning of any kind is accomplished by trial and error, mentally correcting aim after an error until a successful motion, movement, or performance has been achieved. And then number 5, you must learn to trust your creative mechanism to do its work and not jam it by being too concerned or too anxious as to whether it will or will not work. And I mean, there's a lot more that it says about it, but those are the last 5 things in this chapter, and I wanted to leave you with that. Replay it and listen to those things again, and really get to work on your self-image, because that's where all of your success starts. It starts with the belief that you can do it. So until next week, I'll see you then.
That's all for this week. Tune in next week for another episode of Success Weekly. Do you have an idea you'd like James to talk about in an upcoming episode? Post your comments and be sure to share this podcast with friends.